that's what we're meant to do. We're meant to access this love. There is more available to us than ever. And that's the message for the planet, that we have to, in order to experience that, that coming to life, that beating force that I experience, we have to connect with love.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Dr. Yvonne Cason, the president of Spiritual Awakenings International. Welcome, everybody. Spiritual Awakenings International is truly an international network. We love to hear where you are joining us from today. So please take a minute and type into the chat where you're joining us from today. We are currently in 75 countries around the world, and we're just delighted about that. And we have people attending today. I'm joining you from Toronto, Canada. And our speaker, Ann Archer Butcher, is joining us from San Diego, California, and Robert Beers from Oregon. And we've got somebody, AJ from Colombia. Hi, AJ, and Oregon, Nova Scotia, Canada. Awesome. And England. Welcome, everyone, from wherever you're joining us around the world. It is my great pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Ann Archer Butcher. Her life has included a series of incredible and profound spiritually transformative experiences. She was rescued by dolphins from a shark attack in the Atlantic Ocean. She survived a near-death experience. She's had many mystical visions and prophetic dreams. And she had an out-of-body journey that taught her about the true nature of life and death. However, her extraordinary experiences in 1984 took her far beyond that. 5 blue rings that she'll be sharing with us today is her mystical true story of adventure and hope for the planet. I welcome Ann Archer Butcher.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. I appreciate being here. Thanks so much. I want to share with you guys today the story of 5 blue rings, but I want to begin briefly by saying my life has been a series of events that are all spiritually oriented and powerful. And it began when I was just a little baby. My mother said when I could string 2 sentences together, I said, I have to talk to God. I forgot something important. And that began my spiritual search. And what I was looking for, I believe, is the story that I'm sharing with you today. So in my mind, I came to this planet in this lifetime in order to share this story with you today. And I'm excited to be able to do so. So thanks for being with me. You've heard the first part where I'm saying that my life was one mystical experience after another, and it really took off in my classroom in Indiana when I was teaching. And I had asked God, dear God, teach me truth so that I can teach them truth. I was really young and teaching English and philosophy. And one day I put my hand on the board and I began writing things that I had no idea what I was writing. And the entire class felt that they were being quickened, and I had no spiritual background for any of this. And, I went from one mystical experience to the next, as you heard in the introduction. But what really happened in 1984 was amazing to me. And the principle behind this story, 5 blue rings, begins with the fact that I was kicking and screaming not to have this experience. So sometimes life is like that. The very thing that we are here to do, we resist with everything we have. And yet it's exactly what we're meant to do. So I was with this man, a doctor, who he'd sold his medical practice and he wanted to go on an adventure. And we went up to Seattle and he wanted to go on this ship, but I had a dream the night before. It was a dream of warning. And in the dream, it said, if you go aboard the ship, when you leave, you will no longer be together. And I told him, oh, my dreams are highly prophetic. And if that's the case, then we mustn't go on the ship. And he insisted that we do so. And the next thing I know, I find myself on the MS Expex, which to me was an absolute rust bucket. I couldn't believe that I was bringing my 5-year-old daughter, but I thought, oh, well, he'll tire of this soon and we'll get off this ship. We certainly won't stay. It was as long as a football field and 6 decks high. And it just seemed, like an absurd thing to be on this ship. But there I was. I moved in, and the next thing I know, I was doing everything from teaching the students on board, because people were coming on to see if they also wanted to be a part of this venture, and cleaning things on the hull and scraping things down on the decks. And there I was, living on the ship with my 5-year-old daughter, Sarah. Here she is. She's put coat hangers in her hair so she can make her pigtails stand out. But that's what it was like to me. Here is my little girl on this ship, and I couldn't believe I'd put myself in this position. And yet the man that I was with felt very strongly that we should give it a try. But the owner of the ship wanted a man named Alden Butcher, a producer, to come and participate. He felt that Alden could make the whole project come alive. It was supposed to be a floating display for products for third world nations, developing countries that needed things like John Deere tractors. And he wanted the producer to come in and get this thing, make it look like it was actually viable. And so he asked me to call Alden Butcher, and Alden had already turned the project down several times because it was a joint venture, no cash up front. And yet when I called him, the owner had said, when he hears your voice, he will say yes. When I called him, he did say yes. And when I said, oh, did your schedule clear or something? He said, no, actually, it's something about your voice. And so the next thing you know, there's Alden arriving in Seattle. He's come to see the ship, the Rust Bucket, mind you. But he comes, and something very mystical happens right there at the airport. The guy that I'm with, Harold, comes to the airport with me, and Harold Olmsted, Dr. Harold Olmsted, is watching as I walk up to the gate. Back then you could go straight to the gate. And I greeted Alden, and I turned around to introduce Harold, and he disappeared, and I didn't know where he went. We had a plan, but he disappeared, and I would not find out for 1 year why he disappeared that day. But when we finally found him, he was back at the car, and he was very quiet. He never said anything. And I knew something had happened, but I didn't understand it. Now, Alden did decide that he would participate. And whatever mystery that was, I tried to forget it that happened at the gate. And now I find myself the morning that we're supposed to leave Seattle through the gates of Juan de Fuca, the Strait of Juan de Fuca, in the Seattle area. There were helmsmen who were hired to come and steer this ship. But I saw them, and the owner wanted to give them the tour, he said, and asked me to come up to the bridge. So I came up to the bridge to stand guard, but there's nothing to stand guard. All that equipment that you see there, none of it worked. We had not had time to get all the equipment working, except you see the wheel, that wheel worked. So that's all you had to steer a 300-foot ship to sea. And what had happened was the helmsman took one look at it and said they wanted no part of it. I don't know that, though. They won't use their license to go aboard. And so they insist that the owner takes them to shore. I didn't realize it, but the owner got frightened, and he decided that he would take his family with him and that they would all leave. But they left me standing at the helm with only an old captain who was the map reader, the navigator, in the room behind this room. He's there yelling at me and giving me coordinates. 5 degrees starboard, he's yelling. And I'm like, starboard, okay, that's my right hand. I know nothing. And I certainly don't know what 5 degrees is, because look, you can see, you don't know there what that wheel turning this way or that, what 5 degrees might be. And he's yelling and screaming. And I said, you know what? I don't know how to steer this ship. But we're moving. So the owner had given the engineers the go ahead and this ship is moving and I'm standing there at the helm. And he said, he began swearing at me. You better know what's going on, but I don't. And the next thing you know, the warning should have been given because this was right on the ship. Guests prone to motion sickness or dizziness should not be on this ship. But I got very sick, and I said, "Oh, I can't stand here. I'm sick." And the old captain wouldn't let me move. He said, "You just stand there with your hands on the wheel." And so I did. And I began to practice the principle of living as if, because he's a crusty old sailor, but what he said to me was, I just want you to let your stomach move with the ocean. And I'm like, that is no cure for seasickness. Anybody could try that anytime. And he goes, just do it. Just act as if you're not sick. Let your stomach move with the ocean. And the next thing I knew, I was not sick. But then he's screaming at me to steer the ship, just steer the ship. And I'm like, why don't you teach me how? I don't know what I'm doing. He goes, I don't know how to steer this blankety blank ship either. And so what was I to do? And I began to use the as if principle again, a spiritual principle that says, if we can just live as if we know what it is that we are doing, we will know what to do, or that we have what it is that we want, then we will have that in our lives. And I began to ask as if I know everything about this ship. I'm like an old sea captain myself. I understand the currents of the ocean. I know how the ship works. I know how to steer the ship. But honestly, everybody, I'm a person that my husband doesn't even let me use the stuff in the kitchen because I break everything. I can break a toaster, a can opener at the drop of a hat. And so I'm at the wheel of a very expensive ship, and I don't know what I'm doing, but something happens. Suddenly, it's as if a mist enters the room, and ping, 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 this mist is cooling my brow, and I feel it all over my body. And I have no idea what this wonderful otherworldly mist is, but suddenly I know how to steer the ship. I know everything. I am having a spiritually transformative experience in that moment. I have become an old sea captain. I know how to steer the ship. I know what the currents of the ocean are like. I know everything. And I stand there begging the captain, tell me, how would I know if I know how to steer this ship? He said, just wait 20 minutes and we'll go out and look at your wake. Right now, your wake looks like a big old S curve. And if it gets straight, then you know how to steer the ship. Half hour later, there's my wake, straight as an arrow. I knew how to steer the ship. And now the worst part is I realized that the captain's gone. I mean, the owner is gone. He's taken those helmsmen with him, and I am here alone. And it's a long, long way to Los Angeles, but that's where we're headed. We've left Seattle. We're heading to Los Angeles. It should take us days to get there. So I say to the old captain, can you take over for me? Because I'm getting tired. I'd been there, standing there for 4 hours. And he said, no way. And I said, well, what am I going to do when I get more tired? I mean, somehow we can't just stop. I mean, what am I going to do? And he said, you're just going to have to stand there and steer this ship. And so time passes. I go all day. I go all night. The old captain goes to sleep and leaves me there all night. I'm just stunned. I have a near incident in the ocean. In the middle of the night, I see a small light, and I have a radar unit, and I don't know how to use it. And so I'm looking at the radar going, oh, look at that thing. It's a blip. I don't know what that blob is, but I think I should avoid it. So I start steering around it. Turns out it was a ship dead in the water, and I passed it in the night. The next afternoon, something very strange happens. This is what it looked like a day and a half later as a storm is approaching. It became very, very dark, like nighttime. And I said to the old captain, is this like just a passing storm? Do we know anything about a storm coming up? And he said, no. And he said, but you've learned how to steer this ship. That's the first miracle I've ever seen. He said, let's just hope you can get us through a storm. The storm begins with lightning and thunder. That's not too terrible, but then the waves come in. After a while, the waves get so big that they crash over the top of the ship. and I am fighting for our lives every second. Now, the reason this ship was chosen to go into third world countries was because it had a shallow draft. That meant that it bobbed high in the surface and didn't need a deep port to go into. But in a storm, that meant it easily was knocked over this way and that. The waves were huge. I fought all night. And in the morning, I awakened to a peaceful sea. So we made it through the night. But in the night, we lost power and we had taken on water. And I had contacted the Coast Guard, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. We kept calling and calling and calling, and they didn't answer. And since the owner was from Iran, I had the cook who spoke Farsi also Mayday in Farsi so that he might pick up the message on the ship-to-shore radio. Here's this very expensive ship out in the middle of the horrible storm off the coast of Oregon is where we were now. And I thought, surely he would pick up the message and care what was happening to the ship. And inwardly, I'm thinking, I got to get off this ship. How did I ever get myself in so much trouble? But spiritually, sometimes we're guided to things that look like the opposite of what they are. Everything is illusion. But I wake up in the morning to a bang, bang, bang on my cabin door. And I open the door and there's a man pointing a rifle at me. And he says, ma'am, I am with the United States Coast Guard and you are under arrest. And I thought, oh my God, how did I go from the fire to the frying pan into the fire, I think is the expression. And I was in so much trouble. And I told him to put the gun down because my little 5-year-old daughter is coming out of the cabin. I've barely been able to check on her. And, you know, I don't want her to see this gun. Fortunately, he did. He was very polite. He put the gun down. When my daughter came to the door, he said, you know, honey, we're the United States Coast Guard and we're here to rescue you, because that's what I asked him to say. But he whispers to me, but remember, ma'am, you are under arrest. And I said, what am I under arrest for? And he said, for suspicion of guns and drugs aboard this ship. And you are the first mate. And we are going to arrest you and anyone else on the ship who's involved. And inwardly, I get, listen to your inner voice, listen to your guidance. So I'm having a spiritually transformative experience once again, this time in the form of inner guidance that is trying to calm my beating heart because I'm scared half to death. I've never had a gun pointed at me before, but here I am dealing with the United States Coast Guard. And what can you do? They have such powers at sea. I don't know anything. I just know that the owner has left me in charge of a ship, listed me as the first mate on the manifest, and now they expect guns and drugs on board. I'm thinking, you know, this man has no drugs on board. I can't imagine why they're saying that, but he does have a gun room and it's 2 cabins put together and it's full of guns. He's got Winchester rifles, but he's also got automatic rifles. It's his gun collection. Is it illegal to have a gun collection? Perhaps so. I don't know. And since I'm responsible, I certainly don't want to show them the gun collection. But they say they want to inspect the ship. And I go to the old sea captain. I said, what do I do? And he said, okay, we made it. You learned how to steer the ship. That was miracle 1. We made it through the storm. That was miracle 2. You got to get rid of the United States Coast Guard, honey. And that's going to be miracle number 3. And I'm like, how do you do that? They've got guns. And he said, I don't know, but you're going to have to do it. So I asked if the old captain and the chief engineer could come with me on the inspection. And they said, no, it was only me. So off we go. And I'm begging inwardly, because you do have to ask for the help that you want. You have to ask for the guidance that's always there. And I ask, what do I do? How do I get rid of them? And I hear inwardly, mock up anger. And I do exactly that. I mock up anger. And I have been taking lessons from this old captain who was yelling and screaming and swearing at me. So I began to swear at the United States Coast Guard. I don't think it's a good idea because they have guns, but you know, that's what I'm getting inwardly. It's the only thing I know to do. So I do it. And I say, all right, you want to inspect my blankety blank ship. I need to help you, and let's go into the first cabin. And I knew that the pillows were old, and I began to rip at the pillows, and feathers began to fly everywhere. And they started saying, now ma'am, now ma'am, now ma'am. And I couldn't tell what on earth I was going to do, but I did my best, trying to say that it was definitely not going to be guns and drugs found aboard this ship. And they insisted that we go cabin by cabin, but there were so many cabins that we began to look, and I began to knock down doors and tear pillows apart and yell and scream, and they're now mamming me. And then I realized, okay, to skip the gun room, maybe I can yell at them about the fact that we don't have time to go through every cabin. That's what I'm getting inwardly. And so I say, we're going to have to do a random search. We don't have time. And they're like, no, ma'am, no, ma'am. And so I skip one room, and then I go through three, and then I skip a room and I go through a couple of more. And I managed to pass the gun rooms. And instantly I get a message that says why they have boarded my ship. It's not because of guns and drugs. Now, I think the United States Coast Guard can board you for any reason, but I said the guy was young. The captain of the Coast Guard was really young. I was only 30 years old, and he was younger than me. And so I said, you know what? We need to talk. And he said, you can talk in front of my men. And I said, no, we need to talk. And I said, I know why you boarded my ship, and you've boarded me illegally. And he goes, how is that possible? And I said, come with me and we'll discuss it. So we went down to the end of the hall, and I said, okay, this is going to be a very short conversation. Here's the deal. You boarded me illegally. You are lying when you say you expect that there's guns or drugs on board. You have no reason to suspect that. What you don't is you don't speak Farsi. You don't speak Farsi. That's what the problem is here. You don't know why you're even boarding me. You just don't speak Farsi. I was begging you to come and rescue us last night. That storm was horrible. We were taking on water. We lost power, but you didn't come. I maydaid in English. I maydaid in Farsi. And that's why you boarded my ship. But I have friends in very high places, and you're going to rue the day that you walked on my ship and pointed that gun at me, unless you leave now and simply say, yes, ma'am, don't ask for any papers, stop this inspection, and get off my ship. And for whatever reason, he turned and said, yes, ma'am, and he left my ship. And they managed to tug us to the coast of Oregon, where we sat, and we spent all Christmas there. And then eventually we managed to get our way down to Long Beach. I do have to steer the ship to Long Beach, but this time I have lots of guys that I'm teaching how to steer the ship. And when we get into Long Beach, we're boarded by the harbor master pilot. And I'm excited to see somebody who can actually steer the ship besides me. And he comes on board and he says to the old sea captain, he said, who's your best helmsman? And he said, she's the best blankety blank helmsman I ever saw, my blankety blank life. And he said to me, are you licensed? And I said, no. And he said, how do you know how to steer this ship? And I said, I learned it somewhere once. And so he said, how good are you? And I said, I can do whatever you want. What do you want done? And he said, can you steer without looking? And I said, I've been steering all night, every night. I know how to do it. And so he said, well, could you just get down, because they're looking with binoculars into the ship. And if you could just sit between my legs on the floor and steer the ship, then they'll think I'm doing it, but I can't steer this ship. And I managed to get it into the Long Beach Harbor, which I guess is pretty treacherous. And we did not go and like park right next to the land. We were out stationed in the water. It took about 20 minutes by dinghy, but we had to get to the post where we would anchor ourselves, and that's exactly where we were, and we stayed there for some time. But this is where Alden Butcher was from, and he joined us again. And so we celebrated. This is the man that I was with is the man with the beard. There's Alden in the golden jacket, and I'm there on the far end of the table in green. And we were very, very excited to be in Los Angeles. But you don't see the owner of the ship here, and it turns out he was a pretty unscrupulous man, and he had designs on me that I did not understand. His wife is in the red and white striped shirt there. She didn't like what was happening. I didn't like what was happening, and we decided that I needed to leave the ship. And the owner didn't want me to leave the ship, and I'd become frightened of him. So what happens next is we spirit me away, we sneak me off the ship. And while I'm waiting for my friend, the gentleman over there with the beard that I think is my husband, to leave the ship, I'm going to stay with my daughter at Alden's house and wait for Harold to join us. And so sitting at night by the fireplace, Alden and I begin to talk, and we talk about a lot of spiritual things, because spirituality is what my life is all about. But something absolutely amazing happened. A blue light appeared between my forehead and his forehead, going back and forth. And I put my hand up, I touched the blue light. I'm like, oh my God, I wish he could see that. Now, that was kind of me being egotistical, because I thought, well, I'm very spiritual, so I can see it, but I don't know if he can see that light. And suddenly he asked me, how are you doing that? And I said, I'm not doing it. And he said, well, you must be doing it, because I have never seen anything like this before. And I said, no, I'm not doing it. And I don't know how it's appearing, but I do know what the blue light is. It's the presence of the divine. Sometimes it's the white light, sometimes it's a golden light, but with it came the sense of absolute purity and bliss, a euphoria that I never imagined existed. And we ended up, the light lasted all night. So we ended up playing with it. It's late at night, and it goes on to 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, till we simply couldn't stay awake any longer. We fell asleep in front of the fireplace. And it happened that week. And everything began to shift and change. And the next week, it happened again. That was absolutely amazing. The third week, we're sitting there talking on a Friday evening in front of the fireplace, and Alden's saying, do you think you could do it again? And I said, I tell you, really, I'm not doing it. I'm not capable of doing it. I believe that it's happening spontaneously for a reason of its own, and I don't even understand it. I would like to understand it better. And suddenly it appeared again. And so now I have no idea if it's going to keep happening all the time, but I know things are changing between Alden and me. We are becoming closer and closer as we discuss what's going on. And to me, it was just the most amazing experience. But I'm a very loyal person, and I was waiting for the doctor to get off the ship and for life to go on with him. And then something happened one day. After the third time of seeing the light, I got a headache one day. Alden was at work. I'm at home at Alden's house playing with my daughter. And I told her, I can't play. I've got to lie down. I have a terrible headache. And the headache got worse and worse. I would have actually taken myself to the hospital, but I had Sarah with me. So I'm just waiting and waiting for Alden to get home from work. Finally, around 5 o'clock, he comes walking in the house. And by now, the headache was throbbing so badly that I could hear that it almost had a voice to it. And I listened carefully, and it sounded as if it was saying, kiss him, kiss him, kiss him. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to kiss him. And the sound got louder and louder, so that when he finally walked in and said, what's going on with your head? I said, I just need you to do an experiment for me. And he said, what is it, Ann? I'll do anything. And I said, I need you to kiss me one time. And he said, kiss you? You think I am an experiment? And I'm like, please don't argue. You said you would do anything. I just need you to kiss me one time, okay, please? And he said, all right, I'll kiss you. But he just sort of pecked me, and it didn't go away. The headache's still going, kiss him, kiss him, kiss him. And I said, okay, that wasn't good enough. I need you to do it again. And this time you need to put your whole heart into it. And he goes, all right, you want to be kissed? I will kiss you. And he takes me in his arms and he kisses me passionately, and it's quiet, peaceful, no more headache at all. And I am like, this is the craziest spiritual experience I have ever had. And yet, as I'm standing there with him, I said, oh my God, something's happening. And he said, what is it now? And I said, there's an energy coursing through me like nothing I have ever experienced before. And he said, well, what is it? What is it like? And I said, I don't know. And he said, does it have anything to do with me? And I said, do you want it to have something to do with you? And he said, I might. And he said, what about you? And I said, I might, because of course we've been having this major mystical experience together. And I said, but I'll tell you what, I'm changed. And I said, I feel like Sleeping Beauty. That energy from the kiss is coursing through my body and I can't go back. I'm going to have to break up with Harold. And he said, don't you think you should talk to Sarah first? Because, you know, Sarah thinks that I'm married to him. I think I'm married to him, but I called Sarah in and I said, Sarah, I need to talk to you a minute. And she said, have you told him yet? Well, suddenly I remember something that I had completely forgotten. And Alden has been through so much since he walked in the front door. He's like, tell me what else don't I know? And I said, something happened. And Sarah said, I'm going to leave now. And she walks out of the room. And I said, remember, Alden and Sarah share the same birthday. And on their mutual birthday, Alden had come aboard the ship and he had sent a telex in advance and offered to take us all to Disneyland for her birthday and his birthday, mutual birthday. And when we got back from Disneyland, it was a beautiful day. But Sarah came to my cabin and she said, Mommy, I've had a talk with God. And I said, what did you and God talk about? This was not normal language for us. And she said, I told God that I want Alden Butcher to raise me. And God agreed. And I said, God did not agree to that. And she said, Mommy, it doesn't matter what you say because God did agree. And I'm like, no, God didn't agree. Alden Butcher is just a business associate. And she said, it's okay, Mommy, I won't tell anyone. So she wanted me to tell Alden right now, when we called her in to tell her about the kiss and what had happened and that we might want to be together, she knew in advance and she wanted me to tell him that he not only had just kissed me and we might want to be together, but he's supposed to be raising my daughter and we're supposed to be together. And I began to tell him what happened. And he said, okay, let me get this right. I walked in the door less than 15 minutes ago, and now you and I are together. You're breaking up with Harold. I am going to raise your daughter and I assume we're getting married. And I said, yeah, I think that's about the size of it. And he said, oh my gosh. He said, okay. He said, I think you and Sarah need to go and talk to Harold. Well, when I left the ship, we had made a plan that if I need to reach him, we could send a message, a coded message, and he would meet us on a certain part of the beach in Long Beach where we wouldn't be seen by anyone. And so Sarah and I went to meet Harold. And when we went to meet him, I felt really bad because I have to tell him that I want to break up with him. And we'd been what I believed was married for 2 years. And this is a very short time to be together. And I had really looked forward to being with him, but everything had been different since that day at the airport. And I never understood what happened. So when Harold came, I said, I really need to talk to you. And he said, it's okay, Anne, you don't need to explain anything. And I said, oh, but I do. I have a lot to explain. And he said, I've known for a year what was going to happen on this day. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he said, the day you met Alden Butcher, I had my first mystical spiritual experience and it changed everything. And I said, what do you mean? What happened? And he said, well, you know how you're always talking about your experiences? And I said, yes. And he said, well, I had one. He said, when I saw you look at Alden, I saw a blue light between your foreheads go back and forth. And I heard a voice say loudly, this is an uncommon rapport. Let no man put asunder. And I knew we would never be together. And that I mustn't do it. But I argued with the voice and I said, but she's my wife. And the voice said, this is an uncommon rapport. Let no man put asunder. And he said, I looked around in the airport thinking everybody could hear it because it was so loud, but turns out it was only me and it was meant for me. And it's taken me a year to get used to it. But I arranged for you to go and stay at Alden's house and wait for me for these few weeks because I wanted to give you a chance to see what would happen. And I said, well, we haven't done anything, but we do want to be together. And he said, I understand. And Sarah came over, and she's always been very spiritual. And she said to him, she prophesied and said, don't worry, you'll meet your true love and you'll have a little girl and she'll look exactly like me. Well, he believed he couldn't have children. So I said, Sarah, don't promise him that. And she said, no, mommy, it's true. And Harold said, let her tell me, it gives me comfort. And so at that point, I said to him, well, what do we do about our marriage? And he pulls out a piece of paper out of his pocket. And he said, I think you'll find this very interesting. He said, this letter just caught up with us. This letter was, we had flown up to Canada. Actually, we'd flown up to Toronto to get married. And there was an event going on there, and we had a lot of friends there. So we'd flown up there and we'd filed the papers exactly as we thought we should. And we hadn't filed them properly. So this letter had been chasing us the whole time we were on the ship. And it said that we were no longer married because we had to refile by a certain date or our marriage would be null and void. So he said, Anne, we're not married. In fact, according to this letter, we never have been married. And I mean, I couldn't believe it. It was like, so I'm free to go back and be with Alden. And he said, yes. And he said, I will come off the ship, but I'm very excited about your relationship. And I've had a year to get used to this and know that it was coming. So it was sad. And we cried a little bit, hugged each other. It was very, very sweet. And Sarah hugged and kissed him, and off we went back to Alden. But Alden and I, the next week or so, we didn't see the blue light again. Next week, we didn't see the blue light again. And he said, Anne, I think you need to go talk to somebody. There's somebody in Los Angeles who's really mystical and has a great reputation for helping people understand why they've come into this lifetime. And you need to go talk to somebody and find out about this blue light and what's been going on in your life. Your life has been one crazy mystical experience after another, and you probably could use some insight. So why don't you go talk to him? And I said, well, let's go talk to him together. And he said, he only takes clients one at a time. And I said, okay, I'll go. So I go to see this man, and I tell him, I'm excited to tell him about the blue light, but he tells me to sit down and to go to a point just before I was born in this lifetime, so I can see why I came. And so I said, that's it? You're just telling me to sit there and do it and it's going to happen? And there's no hypnotism, there's no nothing? And he said, no, nothing. He said, you just close your eyes and go backwards in time to the point just before you were born. So I thought, well, I can do better than that. But before I had entered his big mansion in Los Angeles, I had asked if there were any guardians or guides or masters or angels who want to accompany me. I invited them all to come. And when I sat down in the chair and tried to go backwards, he stopped me for a moment and he said, wait a minute, who are these people? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, I see people in the room. And I said, what kind of people? And he said, well, some of them are in ancient robes and some of them look like angels with big wings. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. I invited them. And he said, but if you invited them, why can I see them? You don't see them, right? And I said, no. And I said, but I think it's kind of a cosmic joke. If you can see them, then I don't need to see them. I know they're here. I invited them. So he said, okay, he's grumpy. He goes, let's just get this thing started. And then he said, what's that sound? And he said, it sounds like Hugh. And I said, oh, that's my mantra. It's an ancient name for God. And I sing it every day. And he said, could you please turn down the volume? And I said, no, I don't think there is a volume control. And he said, all right, let's just begin. So I try to go backwards in time, just to the point before I was born. And I find myself flying through time rapidly. And I land on a past life on an ancient planet. And I'm a young girl. I'm about 16 years old. And I'm there for a mission, an assignment that I'm being given. And I am very excited about the assignment. But then a young man walks in. I am with these ancient masters, and they're giving me the assignment. But this young man walks in and he's supposed to be my partner. And I recognize he doesn't look like Alden, but I recognize he is Alden. That is who my partner was from an ancient past life assignment. That's who my partner was. And we are both given blue rings of light, 2 rings. We are told these rings contain the seed of your mission. They're going around and around our bodies like hula hoops. And we're told that when it is time for the mission to begin, these rings will be retained by you, and they contain the seed, and you both will know exactly what to do and when to do it. And then the Alden person, the young guy, leaves, and I'm left standing there with one of the ancient masters who kind of acts very grandfatherly to me. And I said, I want to know more. And he said, for you, there is more to know. And he puts his hand out, and suddenly there's 3 more rings around my body. So I have 5 blue rings around my body. And I said, why do I get 3 extra rings more than he did? And won't he need them too? And they said, these are the communicator rings. They will stay with you until the moment that it is time for the mission to begin. And then they will be both retained and transferred simultaneously. And I said, how will I know how to do it? And I began to ask a lot of questions. And they take me to this wall of glass, what appears to be glass, but it actually is like a huge telescope. And I'm looking out over planets in the galaxy, and I see the planet Earth. And that's how I realize that I'm not on the planet Earth. And above the Earth, I see the blue rings, huge, not like the hula hoops floating around me, giant blue rings that they're so big and all encompassing. And out of them comes this mystical light that's flowing into the planet, blue and white light. And it's beginning to make the planet undulate as if it's being born, as if it's coming to life as never before. And I began to cry, and I said, whatever that is, I want to be a part of it. And they said, and so you will be. And what happens next is that I try really hard to stay in the experience, but I can feel myself being pulled out of it. But I have so many questions, so many things I want to ask, but I don't get a chance. I find myself going through time, going through a black tunnel. I land back in my chair in Los Angeles in this beautiful mansion. And I said, oh my God, that was the most incredible experience. And I said, all my life, I've been wondering what I had forgotten. It's this experience. I knew this experience was supposed to happen, but I had forgotten. I've forgotten how to transfer these rings. I don't know how to do it. And the guy that I'm with there, he's not really paying any attention to me. He's kind of blissed out. And I said, what happened for you while I was having that experience? And he said, I was in the presence of these masters and angels. And he said, I really want to thank you for coming here today. And I said, oh, I thank you. I just had the most incredible experience of my life. And he said, it had nothing to do with me. And I'm, what? And he goes, this is not what I do. And he said, I don't know what happened to you. I don't know what happened to me. It has something to do with the presence of these beings in this room, but it's not me. If it's not me at all. And I said, well, I thank you anyway for facilitating. It was incredible. And what I've seen is that lifetime after lifetime, I tried to transfer those rings. I tried to make this happen. And I was born into this lifetime feeling that I failed because I never learned, how am I to transfer those last 3 rings? So now I leave and I meet up with Alden, and I'm telling him about this great experience and about the blue rings and everything that's gone on. And he seems upset and he wants to sit and talk with me. And I thought, oh my gosh, have I broken the law of silence? Was I not to tell him this? Because he's not acting happy at all. And he said, we're on some mission we know nothing about, Anne. And I said, well, actually, no, we're not. And I said, we're not on the mission at all, because look, I failed. I don't know how to transfer the rings. And he said, Anne, he said, surely you realize the rings are transferred. And I'm like, no, I don't know how to do it. And he said, Anne, 3 times we've seen the blue light between our foreheads. What do you think that was? And I'm like, it was the rings, one after another. They've been transferred. And he said, yes. And that is why I say we're on some mission we know nothing about, and it's been initiated. It has started. And I said, oh, it was so beautiful. If you saw what I saw, if you saw this magical light pouring into the planet. And he said, what do you think it is? And I said, I don't know. And he said, let's go for a drive. So he takes me to the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles. It's early evening now. The lights are all on. The place is gorgeous, but it reminds me of the place that I was taken in the inner worlds, to the place where I landed, where I met with these ancient masters, and I was given the rings because it's got this big dome and it's a white building. And so I feel like time is collapsing and I'm having this strange mystical experience, even as Alden is taking me toward the building. And I'm like, gosh, it's just so amazing, everything that's happening. And we walk around the back. You see that little pathway to the right. We walk around to the back and we stand there looking out over the city of Los Angeles toward the Pacific Ocean. And Alden said, do you get any clearer picture of what this is about? And suddenly I understood. And I said, the world is being quickened, Alden. This is the real quickening. This is what my whole life has been leading to. It's not me. It's not us. This is a mystery of its own. I don't understand it completely, but I know that the communication will be increased with the world. It will be speeded up. Everything is going to change. And he said, what do you mean by that? And I said, at the time, now keep in mind, this is in the 80s. We didn't have a cell phone. Alden carried something around in a giant pack like this on his shoulder. That's the only phone I'd ever seen. He called it a field phone, and he used it for productions. And we didn't have cell phones. You couldn't pick up the phone. If I picked up the phone near my mother to make a long distance call, she would say, you shouldn't do that. It's too expensive. I mean, people just didn't communicate like they do today. And I remember, we didn't even have fax machines yet. And so it took a long, long time for us to communicate around the world. And I said to Alden, it's going to speed up. It's going to speed up so fast in such a short period of time that we would have no idea what it's going to look like. But it's really not about the speeding up of technology. It's about communication. We're going to be able to communicate at a much higher level. That's what the quickening is about, with each other, individually, spiritually, globally. We're in the middle of a transformation. I don't understand it. And I said, I wasn't given that part. I wasn't given that knowledge. I'm sure other people will have much more awareness than I, but we get to tell this story. And he said, you think that we are to tell this story? And I said, yes. And I said, that's what I believe this is about. This story wants to be told. And I said, when we were given those 2 rings that had the seeds of the mission within them, I believe that the seeds are in the story itself. And he said, well, how do you want to do that? And I said, you're a producer, maybe you can produce a show about it. And he said, I'm not that kind of producer. I produce big corporate events, Anne. And I said, maybe we need to write the story. And he said, yes, let's do that. And so I wrote and sent myself a copyrighted version of the story. But look how many years ago that is. And right now, Alden and I have not gotten this to the publisher yet. But we have told a story around the world. And I want you to see that that's what we look like when we were together. There we are in Los Angeles. And a lot of wonderful things happened from there. But we felt, for us, we were together at last, that it had been lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes that we'd been separated. and we were together. When Harold came off the ship, by the way, he became our good friend. He really did support us. That mystical spiritual experience that he had had sustained him such that he wanted nothing more than for the two of us to be together. And that was beautiful. The Iranian guy who owned the ship and was so unscrupulous, his wife demanded a divorce, as unusual as that was back then. And she got the ship, which was an amazing thing, which she later sold. But we also had a chance to go to a big spiritual conference together. And as we were walking down the halls of the spiritual conference, of course, for us, it was all about learning more, trying to understand more what this was all about. We ran into a couple, a man and his wife, and the man acted like he knew me. And he said, "Oh my gosh, I never thought I would have the opportunity to see you in this lifetime." And I said, "What do you mean? Do we know each other?" And he said, "Well, I know you." And I said, "But have we met?" And he said, "No, I never thought I would have the opportunity to meet you." Well, I did speak a lot, so I thought he maybe had heard me speak sometime. I didn't understand. Recently, I told the story of being rescued by dolphins in the Atlantic Ocean from a shark attack. And so I thought that's what he meant. And I said, "Where did we meet?" And he said, "We have never met." And he said, "But you are known." And I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And he said, "You are the carrier of the 5 blue rings." And I gasped, and he looked at Alden and he goes, "Oh, and your partner, you both have the 5 blue rings." And I said, "How could you possibly know that?" Now, at this point, Alden and I had spoken this to no one, absolutely no one. We were simply trying to get used to having had this great, amazing experience. Part of us wanted to hide, part of us wanted to hold it to ourselves. And even though we intended to write it, we had no idea when it would come in the world. How could this man possibly know? And so I asked him, and he said, "I can see the rings." And I said, "What?" And he turned to his wife. I mean, I felt so exposed. Are we walking around with blue hula hoops floating around us and people can see them? And he turned to his wife and he said, "You see them, don't you?" And she very quietly and shyly said, "No." And he said, "Oh, they're so bright. I see them so well." And I said, "But how would you even know what they are? Why would you call them the 5 blue rings?" And he said, "There is a prophecy about these rings. And you are well known in the astral plane, the high astral, you're known in the etheric plane. You are the carriers of the 5 blue rings. You may not be known personally, but you are known that you would bring these into the world. And I can't believe in this lifetime we have that pleasure, that this is happening in this lifetime." I, of course, still have no idea what any of this means. We're just barely getting used to this mystical experience that we've had, but we know that it means something good for the planet. In the meantime, Harold does meet his true love, and he has a little girl, and she looks just like my daughter, and he had his fulfilled life. And Alden and I do get married, and we've had a very mystical, you can imagine, amazing life. We've written the story, and we've told it in many places throughout the world. We've had opportunities to share it. And, you know, to us, the timing had to be right. And to finish the conversation that occurred with that gentleman who saw the 5 blue rings floating around us, he gave us a warning, and he said, "You must be very careful when you tell the world about the rings." And I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "The timing must be perfect." And I said, "How will we know when the timing is perfect?" And he said, "You must be very careful." And his wife said, "Stop it, you're scaring them." And I said, "Yeah, I mean, how would we know?" And She touched his arm and she said, "Dear, I think they'll know when the time is right." And he said, "But how will they know?" And she said, "They'll know because they're the carriers of the 5 blue rings." And we all laughed at that. And decades have actually passed since that happened, of course. And life has been beautiful. I'll show you a couple of more slides here. We found the ship. The ship has been restored. It's now called the Aurora in Stockton, California. It was recently on television. They did a show about Chris Wilson, who found the ship and is refurbishing it. He now has turned it into a showpiece. But at the time, it was still a work in progress when we saw it. And it's looking a lot better these days. But that's the big ship that I managed to steer. And Chris loved hearing the story. He wanted to know what had happened to this ship and what had happened when it became the X-Bex. He found it on eBay of all things. And I felt like, and he was just amazed because this ship in its day is a German ship built in 1955. It was just the pride of Germany. And he's tried to restore everything. He couldn't believe that it worked back when I was on it and that the engines actually worked and everything was good. But he hopes to keep it as a memorial and perhaps turn it into a commercial venture. And I personally felt like it was saved because it had been this scene of such mystical and amazing experiences. So that was kind of fun for us, getting to meet Chris, going back to the ship. And, there's a lot more details we've left out today, but they're at 5bluerings.com. The book will be published this year, and we consider it an amazing true story of adventure, romance, and hope for planet Earth. So thank you, Yvonne. And now if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
That was phenomenal. So everyone, that was a phenomenal story and just blew me away, has me speechless. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I was thinking when you were talking about wait till the time is right, well, it appears that right now the time is right. And that it is the time where the communication has been enhanced. And even today's talk went to people all over the planet. So phenomenal. So if you have some questions for Anne, please type them into the chat. But I'm going to start with the first question for you, Anne.
Sure.
You've mentioned to me that there was a time you were in Hollywood talking with producers, I believe at Paramount, about making this into a film. So can you tell us a little bit about that, please, Anne?
Yeah, that was a very interesting story. I had been speaking, I was in San Francisco, I think, and I told the story of the dolphins and the rescue from the sharks and all that. And someone in the audience heard me, and he was sitting next to someone who actually knew me. And he said, "Wow, do you think she would come to Hollywood and talk to us about that story? And has she written it?" And the friend that I knew said to him, "Hey, if you think the dolphin story is good, you should ask her about the 5 blue rings." And so the next thing I knew, I got a call from this producer, and he invited me to LA. And our daughter lived in LA at the time. And so I went to see her, and I went to meet this producer. And he said, "There's a big party this weekend with a lot of industry types." And he said, "Would you mind if I just hint about your story?" I told him the story, and he loved it. He cried. I said, "It's not a sad story. Why are you crying?" And he said, "I'm getting such a strong feeling about what it's going to mean, and I want you to share it." And so I said, "Sure, you let people know, and I'll be here for a couple more days." And the next day my phone rang, and the next day my phone rang, and I kept getting invitations to go to the top production studios in Los Angeles. I went everywhere practically except maybe Disney Studios. And everywhere I got to tell this story. And actually it's a 2-hour story, as if it were a movie. I told it, I skipped a lot for you today, but then I told them the whole story. And it was Paramount who came back and made an offer. and they said, we want to make this a New York Times bestseller. We want to make it a blockbuster film. And I said, oh my God, that's so exciting. And, but the producer said, but Anne, you're not going to like the offer. And I'm like, what's not to love? I mean, I love everything you said. And he said, no, he said, Paramount is insisting that the only way they will release this story is if you release it as fiction. Not only that, but you must sign documents saying that that it's not true, and you have to be willing to swear to that for the rest of your life. And I'm like, why on earth would they want that? I mean, why? They're asking us to lie. I mean, this is a spiritual story. I'm not going to lie. And he said, don't you think you should talk to your husband about this first? And I said, you know, my husband is a real stickler for truth. There's no way he would agree for any amount of money. He won't do it. And I said, and I can't imagine living my life like that. But why would they even ask that? And he said, they wrote it up, and I'm going to read it to you. And I'm going to share with you what they said. They said, Paramount Pictures cannot release this story as true, and will not, because of the paradigm shift that it would create on our planet if it were released as true. And therefore, all those involved with the story must sign legal documents in perpetuity, swearing that it is fiction and only fiction. And I said, well, the answer is no, we can't do it. But I took heart from, I said, a paradigm shift, huh? Well, that's what we really need on the planet. And he said, maybe, but maybe the planet's not ready yet. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he obviously loved the story, so he was very spiritual himself. And he said, I don't think the consciousness is quite ready yet. He said, it may take a decade, it may take two. I'm like, 2 decades? Who would wait 2 decades? And he said, you may need to wait that long, even for the technology to be ready for this story. And he said, but the time will come. I know it will come. And he said, I support your decision to turn us down. And that was it. I mean, Yvonne, it was a very difficult decision to make on the one hand, because who doesn't love New York Times bestseller blockbuster film? I mean, we would have loved that. And the money was obviously magnificent, but we had to say no. And so we've waited this long. We wrote the story. We've had many people edit it. We haven't felt the time was right until now. And so this is the first time that we're telling it with the story completely written. And we're happy to do it for Spiritual Awakenings International.
Well, that is awesome. And I'm so glad you are doing it for us too, Anne. We have a quick question. Clara was not certain. The title of your book, I believe it's 5 Blue Rings, correct?
Yes, 5 Blue Rings.
Okay.
It's not published yet, though. Hang on. 5bluerings.com, though, you can go and learn more.
Great. Now, AJ has a question. He says, why do you think now is the right time to share it?
You know, that's a good question. I think that we are in a quickening. I think that many people are experiencing that. I was just on a show talking about synchronicity and coincidences, and that these things are speeding up for people, and that more and more people are having, as the coin phrase of Yvonne, is spiritually transformative experiences. This is happening everywhere. And it's happening now more than ever to people. And I believe that it's simply that our planet is ready. And one of the hallmarks is the dichotomy. You know, this is a planet of dichotomy. This is a planet of extremes. We have hot, cold, we have night, day, we have extremes always. It's not meant to be a planet of bliss. This is a planet of dichotomy. But when the dichotomy becomes so extreme as it is right now, even with people's thoughts and their feelings and families being separated, and I think that that's the hallmark of the time when we need to know about the 5 Blue Rings. We need to focus on what they really mean. And, you know, I mean, you didn't ask this, Yvonne, but let's just say you ask me, what do they really mean? And I think the 5 blue rings are about love. And that's why we need it. We need it now more than ever.
Mhm. Well, that feeds right into the next question, which is, what is the message, or were you given a message for humanity and for the future of humanity?
The message is that love is the most important force, and that it is flowing here and we are able to access it. Now, how do we access it? That's another question. And I believe that, that could be an entire other conversation to have, but that's what we're meant to do. We're meant to access this love. There is more available to us than ever. And that's the message for the planet, that we have to, in order to experience that, that coming to life, that beating force that I experience, we have to connect with love. And, as I told a friend recently, we were talking about our kids, and these have this view and this have this view and so on. And I was like, just don't get into it. It's about love. It's about peace and harmony, and caring about our planet, caring about each other, caring about our families, caring about ourselves. It's love in all of its various forms. That's really the message. And that it's about service. It's about having an opportunity to look at each other and see, what can I do for this one? And how can I help? And what can I do for the planet? And how can I be of greater help? And how can I be of greater service? Ultimately, that's what love is. God is the greatest servant of all. God is serving all life. And that's what we're meant to do. We're meant to step up and be co-workers with God, to give love and give service to each other and to the planets, and love ourselves and take care of ourselves to the best of our ability.
Awesome. Thank you for that incredible answer, Anne. Another Anne in the audience is asking, do you think Alden is your twin flame?
That's an interesting question. I actually had an interesting spiritual message once that said that we're not soulmates as such, but that we are a choice that was wise to make. So I don't really know what that means, except that we're in perfect harmony together. We know we were meant to be together in this lifetime. And I mean, we've traveled the world together. We've spoken together all over the world, and it's just incredibly fun being with him. And this lifetime we've had together has been a tremendous blessing. So yeah, do I think he is? Probably, but I don't focus on that. I just know I'm meant to be with him. He is my partner in this lifetime, and a great love and a perfect balance for me.
Awesome. Awesome. Ray is asking, have you been given any insights on how the future of humanity and the future of the planet will unfold?
I've already hinted at that. I believe that this is a world of dichotomy, and the planet is meant to be exactly what it is. It's meant to be a place where we have extraordinary experiences. I believe those experiences can go higher and higher and higher in vibration. But remember the part where the angels and masters and mystical beings were all in that room in Los Angeles, and that guy could see them that I went to meet with. I believe that they're there for all of us all the time, and that if we call upon them, they will work with us and help us evolve. And I believe that we are in a time of a quickening. And what that really is raising the consciousness, taking things to a higher level, letting ourselves be higher spiritual beings and be more vocal about who we are and what we've experienced. Spiritual Awakenings International is a great organization because, to me, I really love it in that it allows people to actually talk about the spiritual experiences that they're having without any reference necessarily to whatever spiritual path they're on. And it's not that we deny our spiritual path, but we recognize all spiritual paths. And I think that's important for us too, that without dogma, that we all can move forward and enhance each other. And we are enhanced by hearing each other's experiences. I tune into these every month because I want to hear other people's experiences from all walks of life, from all backgrounds. And that is part of how we can evolve our planet. In terms of seeing the mission, the closest thing I can say is this speeding up. There is an advancement of consciousness. Even though 2 decades have passed, it's like a minute that's passed because so much has happened during those 2 decades. But I think a whole lot more is going to be happening. I do believe that it's extraordinarily important that we manage our own thoughts and feelings well. Not that we deny our feelings, but that we seek the higher level, that we seek joy, that we seek to be the joyous beings that we are spiritually. We inhabit these bodies, but we are great spiritual beings, every single one of us, meant to be joyous and full of love and service for others. And yet each one of us is on our own individual path. And wherever that may lead us, I hope that it would be to an advanced spiritual awareness, because that's really what this is about, letting ourselves be the spiritual beings that we really are, have amazing insights, each one of us, and get those inner messages for ourselves, our lives, and our planet.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Anne.
Mhm.
Deborah is asking, do you think the blue rings are part of or intersecting or holding the Earth's crystalline grid?
That's an interesting question. I don't know about that. I read about this sort of thing, so I'm into it too, Deborah. I'm really not qualified to speak about it. I mean, I said to Alden at one point, when we tell the story, when we really get this out in the world, when people read our books, I am sure people are going to come forward who say, oh, you don't realize it, but this, and this. They're going to tell us more about the story than what we know. We only know the part that we play. And it's like that man that we met in the hallway at that event. He knew much more than we did. He knew all about he has told us what he believes is going on and what he believes the prophecy is. But that's not really my part of the story because it's not my own personal knowledge, but I believe people will come forward who know more than we do.
Awesome. Oh, thank you, Anne. Sorry, I accidentally removed you from the screen. There you are back again. So we have another question. This one's from Clara. And she says, how do we instill love into the minds of people that are producing war?
We have to be carriers of it ourselves. We can only be responsible for our own selves individually. And if we keep ourselves on the dark side, then we're heading in that direction. If we focus on war, we are enhancing war. Whatever we focus on, we are powerful spiritual beings. I used to teach high school and say, you may think you're a high school kid, but I think you're a powerful spiritual being here to fulfill your own greatest and highest destiny. And if that's true, which I believe with my whole heart, then what is our responsibility? It is to be vehicles of love. If I go in the world and I carry worry and doubt and fear with me everywhere I go, what am I enhancing? A low vibration of worry, doubt, and fear. If I go in the world, even though the world has war, if I go in the world and I am filled with peace and harmony and hope and positivity and love and gratitude, can you imagine the difference that can make? The more and more and more of us who do that. Gratitude is really a major key. There's so many books about it, and I read books about it. My husband and I talk about gratitude. Sometimes I do nothing more than practice smiling. I just go smiling and I'm smiling. I walk my dog and I'm smiling. There's nobody to look at me except that coyote standing there, and I smile at the coyote. And then there goes a roadrunner and I smile at the roadrunner, because I want to carry that smile. I want to carry that love into the world and be a vehicle of it. for my own self, for my own life, so that my own life can be better. And I also believe that it's important to surround ourselves with like-minded people, but not to stay isolated within that, to go in the world and bring our love and bring our messages out in whatever way is best for us. That's my feeling.
Awesome. Thank you, Anne. This was an absolutely incredible presentation. Thank you, Anne. I know people are going to want to watch this video and watch it again to hear your beautiful, inspiring words. So thank you very much.